everybody, to another episode of the series Benchwarmers. You are greeted by me, Adam,
Rich,
and our guest here, Caesar.
Caesar. Who's my boy?
It's his boy. We have another podcast for you today. I know it's been a minute. Both of us have been busy with a lot of stuff outside of podcasts, so either with work or with school or
Just life.
life in general.
Just life.
And we all know how that gets and how life can just be good, bad sometimes, but we always just have to work and get through it. But we still managed to pop out some podcasts for you guys because we know that we enjoy it and we know that you guys enjoy listening to us.
So this is Caesar. He's here for the podcast for moral support. He may not say much, but he's here for cuddles and for love. So our topic today, since we figured it's Thanksgiving, we might as well do a Thanksgiving history special.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You want to start us off?
Sure. Well, really, the tradition of Thanksgiving, you got to go all the way back to early English colonization, in the 1600s. It was during the time of exploration, right? So a lot of people were going all over the world, finding new ways to get from one part of the world to the other with ships. And America was just discovered about 100 years ago. Before that, in the 1600s, so in about 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. What ended up happening was that but the French, English, and Spanish all decided to have three different parts of the Americas, right? Spanish decided to get the islands for the most part and all of Latin America as we know today, whereas the English had the coastline between Maine and all the way down to about Georgia, and France decided to take everything north of Maine and probably everything west of the Mississippi, up until about where California is. But what happened there is we had settlers, a lot of them coming for different reasons, businesses, religious reasons, and all of them came for finding a new place, finding something new, either for business or for life. And that's kind of where we get the relationship between the Native Americans, because what we have to understand is that there were three different ways of managing Native Americans. The Spanish were more towards enslavement, whereas the French were more towards mingling between their cultures and the Indian cultures and marrying within them and having them learn their language and convert to Christianity, whereas the English were more just for business reasons. They didn't want to integrate with the natives. They didn't want anything to do with the natives besides getting the materials that they needed and have maybe some new agricultural ideas that will help them that they didn't know bringing over from England.
Yep.
So that's really where, that's kind of the background of the Thanksgiving time where it was created in a sense.
Yeah, so the idea of Thanksgiving that we have today, pardon me, I lost my throat, or my voice. I'm a little sick for a few days, so just recovering now. The concept of Thanksgiving that we have today, we know that, the Pilgrims came over from England, and they came in, and the natives were like, hey, we got food, we can help you out, let's have one giant feast. So the story goes that the Pilgrims came over seeking freedom from religious persecution or just freedom in general from the English lifestyle. And they came into the Americas, and once they arrived here, they were running out of food. They kind of started building settlements, but then the winter came, and the winter was extremely harsh. And they knew they couldn't survive the winter on their own. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have enough supplies. They didn't have enough of anything to make it. So they ended up becoming allied and friends with the native peoples in the United States. And the natives came in and taught them how to farm. They taught them how to fish. They taught them how to survive in the harsh wilderness that was the Americas at that time. So, the day of Thanksgiving is to celebrate and honor the natives and the English people, English settlers that were here, because they ended up feasting after the British or the Pilgrims were able to then grow their food and grow and survive the winter. That's a story that's told to us in schools. However, we know that to not be entirely true because we are history's benchwarmers, and we know that that isn't always the case. It's not always as politically correct or as nice as it actually sounds.
So, I mean, in terms of what we have to understand about, we'll take it into two parts: what the pilgrims were, and then what the natives were. So we'll start with the pilgrims. Pilgrims was actually a radical form of Anglicanism, which it was more focused on the lifestyle, and it was more fire and brimstone, if anything. So the Salem witch trials come from the same idea of where the pilgrims did. Their view on Christianity was very radical compared to the rest of Europe and the rest of England. That's why they were exiled. And that exile led them to what we know today as Amsterdam. And from Amsterdam, they ended up finding passage to the New World, where they had new land. And from what we know, especially with the Mayflower, that ship brought them here, and they didn't expect the winters to be as harsh as they did. They were not used to it. The people died in droves, either on the way there or when they arrived in the New World. And then on top of that, we have to talk about the natives. So understanding that these people were leaving from religious persecution, yes, from England, but not knowing what they were getting themselves into once they got to the New World. And we have the sense of the natives, who, as we know from a lot of sources, that people would consider them barbarians, uncivilized, uncultured, unchristian, which those four things cause for you to do kind of whatever you need to with them as a justification back then. So in terms of when the natives saw the settlers coming, their first reaction was to figure out who these people are. What are they doing here? They're carrying clothes that we've never seen before. They're carrying weapons we've never seen before. And it's a cultural shock that we may not understand today, well, at least not some of us. But that idea of seeing someone that is completely different than you are. I mean, to have a native person see a white person for the first time would be bonkers for them, and the vice versa for the English pilgrims coming here and see the natives. They would never have known what they look like, and these are new types of people before. It's a cultural shock, really, and some of them may have seen them as hostile. Why are they here? What are they doing? And probably through the grapevine, they've heard that other peoples like this coming in big boats from the south or from the north have been making bigger claims into these lands and killing off a lot of people. Now, it wasn't just them killing off a lot of people. It was the diseases that they brought over too, that the natives had not had a lot of immunities to. So millions of natives throughout the United States died in droves simply from disease alone, which that could not have been prevented in any way because of the medicine that we had not been able to produce yet. So now we have our two lines between two people of the story, which natives and the pilgrims that were there.
Continue.
So of course there is going to be a lot of hostility. With that hostility, you are going to have raids. You are going to have women that are going to be killed, raped, or stolen. And on top of that, the famine of them not having food, the idea of them having to scrape everything they can and waiting for supplies, which is going to take weeks, if not months, to get from England to where they are. And people having to survive, and in some cases, people eating other people because of the lack of food that they had there. Now, of course, there was also retaliation by the settlers to move into Indian territory, rape, pillage, burn, steal, just as the natives had done. Now, this is just how things worked. I mean, people were not speaking the same language is a huge barrier. And to understand that different types of people are now dealing with different types of things, there has to be some type of agreement. And so there was a native man who knew English because he had been taken from his tribe when he was a child, earlier in his childhood. I forget his name, but he was kind of the mediator between both groups to find a common ground where someone can translate between both of these languages. And again, we have to understand that though they were a very radical form of Christianity, these people had really no intention of converting the masses of the Indians. They were more focused on only having their religious identity conserved in the area that they had it since they had been exiled. So now they have to find a middle ground between how are they going to help each other out. And this is where we kind of get that notion of Thanksgiving, where they're giving and taking from each other the materials that they need so that they can survive. Of course, the training that the natives had given us, the settlers, were how to farm, how to fish, how to grow, how to defend yourself, how to clothe yourself in the winter properly. Um, and the natives were getting back weapons. They were getting horses. They were getting a language besides the one that they had and something to hold on to. So it's a give and take of both. And for that idea that yes, there was some type of feast that had happened.
So during these times, the concept that we know, so like these times meaning like the 1500s, the concept that we know as Thanksgiving today, the celebration of just this massive feast that we have as a day of Thanksgiving, thanks for giving thanks for what we have today, our families, our friends, our food, our jobs, everything that we're thankful for, was actually a very common occurrence back in the 1500s because the New England colonists would give Thanksgiving to any time they would have success or victory within battle, within farming, within life in general. They would give thanks because they were giving thanks to God. They were giving thanks to each other because they had the ability to survive. So the idea that we know of Thanksgiving, there was in the account, there was 90 pilgrims and 53 natives that were at that 3-day feast of Thanksgiving in celebration that the harvest was over and that the drought had finished and they were able to survive.
And what happened actually shortly after the idea of Thanksgiving, there was a mass raid by natives and pilgrims back and forth to each other, literally the day after, which shows you that yes, we can understand of the Thanksgiving that we had survived, but also it's commonplace. It's conquering people. As much as we may not think about it, it really is. When they came here, when the European powers came here, they came here for different things. Like we mentioned in the beginning of it, the Spanish came for God, glory, and gold, whereas the French came for more relationships with the natives, whereas the English only came here for strictly business.
Well, the French came with the idea of like mercantilism for the soul,
Yes.
where they wanted to come in and convert the natives. The English wanted to kill the natives, or not have any like relations with them because they just didn't like them, and the Spanish just wanted them all dead.
And that idea historically that we've been taught, where you see in elementary schools and middle schools, it's in a sense, and I'll put it in quotations, is a whitewashed version of history, where they give you snippets, but they don't give you the entire picture.
Yes.
And now it's more, I feel, it's more about the message that Thanksgiving sends, of not the historical context of it, which we should know about, and not make such a big deal, because again, things have been terrible, maybe today, but things have been a lot worse throughout history, and that wasn't the first or the last time that would happen to natives, either in America, Africa, Asia, or anywhere else. It happens all over the world.
Stop touching me.
I didn't even touch you. But to have that idea that we shouldn't really be picking and choosing of what to be angry about, but understand the message behind it. Yes, Christmas is about Christ being born, but the idea that you can bring an entire family together throughout the beef that you have within the year, to bring them together under the idea of Christmas, to come sit down next to a fire, talk, drink, do whatever you normally do as a family, but to bypass all of that for a single day to bring everybody together is the message that we need to consider when thinking about Thanksgiving, is what we can do with that message now. Yes, historically we have to understand about the events that have happened, but we also have to understand the message that it sends now.
Yes.
And with that, we can make things, tremendously more different if we could just set aside all issues and disbeliefs. My opinion is my opinion. Rich's opinion is Rich's opinion. And that's fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. And that's the glory of having an opinion, is that from what I've learned, is that there's no real absolute truth, but there are many truths. That's why when you look at history books, there's not one history book on Louis XIV and one history book on Hitler, but there's hundreds and thousands of them. Why? Because people have different opinions and different perspectives on different men and women, ambitious men and women throughout history. And we have to consider that too when we have days like this, where Thanksgiving, where the historical context is a lot more bloodier than has been portrayed, but the message that it sends to its people is really what matters.
Yeah, I think especially in today's day and age where we're closer than ever with technology, but we're as far as we've ever been. Adam and I can talk to each other day in, day out through text messaging or Snapchat or whatever. But at the end of the day, if we're not hanging out, we're not face to face, like that doesn't mean anything. We're disconnected at that point. And I really do think days like Thanksgiving and the holidays that are approaching, other than Christmas, but there's plenty of holidays in December, mean a lot to people, and it can be a very difficult time in the year for people because sometimes people don't have a family, sometimes people lost family, sometimes people don't have the connections that they yearn for, and sometimes it's one of the hardest times of the year for people. But for those of us who have our family and who have those connections, I really think we should push together and get past some of those differences that we have. Like Adam said, putting the beef aside just for a little bit, to be together, to love each other, to say what I'm grateful for, to say what I'm thankful for, to say like, hey, I appreciate you being with me, I appreciate the time that we're spending together. And I think that's the meaning behind Thanksgiving. Not so much the history. The history is important, but I also think that this concept behind Thanksgiving, what we need to celebrate, is also important. And, albeit the history behind it is bloody, like Adam said. After Thanksgiving, like how many raids and murders happened.
It's like
the massacre of Native people was just so commonplace. But unfortunately, we're not celebrating that. We're celebrating coming together as a family, as a country, as unity. And excuse me. One thing that I really dislike is that corporate America has made Black Friday a thing, which then separates the unity that you were celebrating, hours before, to disunity and disorganization and, like fighting and wild and, war in the store because people are going out to buy what they want to buy.
Well, it follows this historical context, I think. Yeah, Thanksgiving one day and then the next day is disunity, anger, and doing all that other kind of stuff. Which I do agree that Black Friday has been something that has been, looked at as in some ways more important than Thanksgiving itself. And the idea of buying gifts for people and, having to impress them and getting the best kind that you can all for one day. And again, the idea that we should all be together for one day.
Gabby made also whoopie pie.
Oh my. I'm thankful for whoopie pies. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for listening to another episode of History's Benchwarmers. We'll be back soon, so have an awesome Thanksgiving. Spend some time with those people that you love and that you hate because, well, why not?
Because it's Thanksgiving, we're going to be thankful for them.
Exactly. Peace!